So my name is Mr. Steve, and today for our first Scary Stories Saturday, we're going to read a story from this anthology. It came out on September 1st, 2020, and it's called Don't Turn Out the Lights. It is a tribute to Alvin Schwartz, who wrote the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books. It's edited by Jonathan Mayberry, but there are lots of different authors who have written short stories for this. We're going to read a short story by Nicole Ostel, and it's called The House on the Hill. They didn't expect that when the answer arrived, it would be via text message. It was just the solution to their money problem, as in not having enough money for soccer camp this year that the girls had been hoping for. When it happened, Wendy was splayed across the bed with a textbook. Her best friend Rosie was studying at her desk. In theory, they were doing homework. They always did it after school at Rosie's house, but any distraction was welcome. Rosie's phone buzzed, jumping against the desk surface. "Check your email," she read the text out loud. "Who's it from?" Rosie shrugged. "I don't recognize the number, but email's more interesting than multi-digit multiplication, so..." She tapped at her keyboard. Wendy watched her friend's mouth twist into a frown. "I don't recognize the sender either. User at hillhouse.eternity. That's the email. The subject line says urgent." "The suspense is killing me." Wendy waved her hand. "Let's hear it." Rosie clicked it open and gasped. From the bed, Wendy rolled her eyes. "What now?" Rosie swiveled in her chair. "This is crazy." She read aloud. "Eccentric recluse Roland Thornhill is offering a prize of $5,000 to anyone with the emotional fortitude to spend the night, sundown to sunup, exactly, at his family's abandoned estate, Thornhill Manor. Proof of stay must be provided in order to collect the prize. This is Thornhill's first public statement since his wife died in a tragic house fire in that very estate 20 years ago to this day. Local legend tells that the late Mistress Thornhill's spirit still walks the grounds. You are the first guest chosen for this experiment. Do not share the details of this invitation with anyone else." Rosie fell silent. "Well, I guess you already blew that," Wendy said. "I'm chock full of details." Rosie had always been the impulsive one. No doubt she was actually intrigued by this weird email. Wendy shrugged and went back to reading. "Now, shh, Gothic Lit awaits." But Rosie kept talking. "Please, it will await for longer if necessary, but OMG, how did they find me?" "That," Wendy said, "is just one of my questions." She shook her head disapproving. "But there's a whole thing with curiosity and the cat. It just didn't work out well. So maybe this is just spam? Maybe we should delete it and pretend we never saw it in the first place." She knew her suggestion would go ignored, but she had to try. Thornhill Manor sat just outside of town, high up on a hill. At night, its outline glowed against the moonlight. Its soaring windows were muddied and cracked, and the peaks and turrets of the roof were saggy and missing shingles, like a semi-toothless smile. It was exactly what people pictured when they heard the words haunted house, especially in the evenings. "I have to say, Ro, the look in your eyes concerns me." Nope, she's not going to ignore this email, Wendy thought. She pushed her book aside. Gothic Lit was definitely done for the night. "Thornhill's offering money for someone to spend just one night in his family's crusty old empty house. One night. I mean, come on." "One night in an abandoned estate," Wendy countered. "An abandoned estate even grown-ups try to avoid. And who's that email from anyway? Ro, this is creepy." "That's the whole point," Rosie said. "I mean, not to be creepy, to be eccentric. He's an eccentric recluse." She said it like it was a good thing. "It's just that I've heard this story before. An invitation from an eccentric recluse to spend the night in an abandoned, possibly haunted house. Wendy shook her head again so her curls swung wildly against her cheeks. She tapped her finger against her book. Much like saying about that curious cat. It doesn't end well. But Rosie's mind was obviously made up. She jumped from the desk and crouched on the bed next to Wendy, clasping Wendy's hand in her own. If we had that $5,000, we could pay for soccer camp. There's no other way. She stood up on the mattress to unsteadily mime a few kicks and blocks before kneeling back down. You have to admit, that prize money is basically the answer to our prayers. Wendy made a face. Not mine. She loved soccer, but grass didn't grow around the Thornhill Manor. According to her mother, the lawns all dried up after the fire and never recovered. Wendy, how much did you make babysitting last week? Rosie pressed. Not enough for soccer camp, Wendy admitted. But still, you love horror movies, I know. But the heroes of those movies are always ending up in trouble. Correction, said Rosie. These kind of things happen in the best horror movies. And a prize if we last through the night? We have to do it. The email says to tell no one, and you did. You already broke the rules. What if... Wendy shuddered and glanced around. What if whoever sent that email is watching us right now? I know you don't believe that. Wendy rolled her eyes. Well, if you don't believe any of this, what does it matter? Rosie pointed out. It'll be fun, I promise. One night, in and out, we'll collect our money. And if you get scared, I'll hold your hand. Ugh. Wendy didn't believe in any of it, and she did want the money for soccer camp. And also, she knew full well Rosie would not let up until she got her way. My hero, Wendy said. Fine, I'm in. She sounded resigned, but she was smiling, however reluctantly. They planned the overnight for the first full moon. Full moons are lucky, Rosie said. Full moons are creepy, Wendy replied. It was springtime at least. The sun set later, and it was warm enough that they wouldn't freeze solid in their sleeping bags. Each girl carried a backpack with essentials, including a large bottle of water, snacks, and a phone with a camera for their prize-winning or prize-collecting proof. But I'm not even supposed to be here, Wendy had protested, futile as ever. You can email your proof to me, Rosie suggested. 2 pics are better than 1? They'd each told their parents they were spending the night at the other's house. Now they stood at the base of the hill looking up at the manor. The sky was the dusky purple of a bruise, streaked by fiery flashes from the lowering sun. The trees around the house beckoned with crooked branches. One shutter hung from a broken hinge, creaking in the wind. It's winking at us, Rosie decided. Wendy shivered. Click. Wendy jumped. Rosie burst out laughing. Edgy much? She held up her phone. Proof, she said, scrolling to a time-stamped image of the house. Hey, squish your face next to mine and say, selfie. I'm not supposed to... Wendy sighed. There was no use arguing with Rosie. She pressed her face to Rosie's and gave a half-hearted smile. Click. The walk up the hill was short, too short. Even Rosie looked slightly uncertain as the 2 girls stared at the gaping maw of the front archway. The door itself had long since rotted away. Wendy started. This was feeling slightly less harmless than when Rosie had originally suggested it. Maybe we shouldn't... Rosie stepped forward. She tried to keep the tremble from her voice, but Wendy could hear the faint cracks in her facade. As Rosie moved inside, Wendy called after her. Are you... What do you see? Let's just say whoever spun vacuuming on the chore wheel has really fallen down on the job. Rosie's voice echoed thinly. But bright side, now's our chance to get a jump on our dust bunny collection. Click. Wendy smiled. Maybe this would all be fine. Rosie was right. After all, haunted houses weren't real. Ghosts weren't real. She rubbed her arms. Someone should tell that to my goosebumps. Eccentric recluses sure are weird, said Rosie. Well, yeah, said Wendy. That's why they're called eccentric. If nothing else, I thought he'd be here to greet us, or someone would anyway. They stood in what was once a library. Sagging shelves were lined with mildewed, peeling leather spines. Wobbly chairs were arranged in clusters, upholstery snarled and spewing clouds of stuffing. Rosie kicked at a chair leg and watched an explosion of dust mites rain forth. No book club meeting in here tonight. This guy collected taxidermy. Wendy pointed at the remains of a particularly unfriendly-looking stuffed rodent of indeterminate origin. Textbook horror movie hobby. Major eccentric points for that, Rosie said. Click. She snapped the picture. You want a record of this thing? All that's left is a giant fang and a beady red eye. What is it, even? Rosie shrugged. Maybe it's the thing that killed Mrs. Thornhill. She died in a house fire, Wendy said. So they say, said Rosie. Wendy tried to force a smile, but the joke wasn't feeling all that funny. From upstairs, they heard a crash. We have to investigate, Rosie said. I'm not sure I agree, said Wendy, but I also know you well enough to know you're not going to let this go. You can stick behind me, said Rosie. The crash led them up to the master bedroom. A quick scan told them the canopy of an enormous four-poster bed had collapsed. Click. This feels specific, said Wendy, like maybe a warning. Remind me not to watch any more scary movies with you, Rosie said, if you're going to take imaginary stories personally. Click. Who are you even going to send that to? Just attach it and reply to that original email? It's brilliant in its simplicity, Rosie said. She gave the room a once-over. This is as good a place as any to camp for the night. They set their sleeping bags up in the middle of the room, between the foot of the bed and an ash-filled fireplace. 3 chocolate chip granola bars later, the sun had set. The room was ink black. The house was an orchestra of odd sounds, thumping from above, thuds and slithers from downstairs, the occasional screech of what Rosie had insisted to be a wild animal. Out there, not in the house. She pointed to a shattered window panes. Sound carries because we're up on the hill. Whatever you say. Wendy wasn't so sure. Could be something living in there, Rosie said, pointing at the mantel. Not comforting, said Wendy. They flicked on their flashlights. Wendy gasped. On the ceiling was the shape of an outstretched arm. Relax, Rosie said, pointing to the window again. Shadow. Click. This time she used the flash. Wendy didn't think she ever would, but eventually the girls fell asleep. Her dreams were wild. An image of the canopy bed engulfed in flames. From within the fire, she could just make out an older-looking woman, slender with a tangle of longer hair. Her skin was melting? Yes, melting, running from her bones like candle wax. Don't tell, said the voice in the dream. Don't tell. I didn't. Wendy opened her mouth to protest, to explain that it was Rosie who'd broken the rules. But in the dream, when she spoke, no sound came. Click. The sounds woke Wendy with a start. The room was pitch black. Even the stars were dim through the window. What was that? She heard it again. A rustle and a thump. Too loud, really, to be an animal in the chimney. And it sounded like it was coming from the central staircase. Like it was coming up the stairs. It sounded like it was coming towards them. Thump. Rustle. drag. Thump, rustle, drag. Thump, rustle, drag. Ghosts aren't real. Ghosts aren't real, she whispered to herself. It wasn't super convincing. All at once, Rosie's warm hand folded over hers. Relief flooded her blood. Thanks. And here she thought Rosie holding her hand wouldn't do much. Right now, it felt like a lifeline. When? Is that you? Rosie's voice sounded groggy and far away. Thanks for what? Thanks for... What? Wendy was confused. Then it hit her. Rosie's voice sounded far away. Wendy shot straight up. Her heart pounded in her ears. She scrambled to switch her flashlight on. An arc of yellow light bathed the shadowy space. What are you doing? Rosie asked. What's that noise? Wendy screamed so hard she thought her throat might burst. Rosie was all the way on the other side of the room. You moved? Wendy's voice trembled. When did you move? What are you doing over there? Rosie looked confused. It got cold with a broken window right over us. You were sound asleep. I didn't think you'd care. You don't understand, Wendy said. She jumped up and started to pack her things. You don't... What? Someone was holding my hand! Wendy sobbed. Rosie's face went pale. Click, click, click. From beside her sleeping bag, her phone was still taking pictures, all on its own. Cautious, Rosie picked up the phone. Gingerly, she swiped through the phone log. Wendy watched through her tears. Then it was Rosie's turn to scream. Screaming went on for some time. Thornhill was high enough on the hill, removed from the town, that they went unheard. When the screams stopped, the room was empty, silent. The girls had vanished into thin air. Suddenly, Rosie's phone, lying next to her empty sleeping bag, buzzed. It was a new text. We told you not to tell. And that's the end. That's just one of the 35 different stories in this anthology called Don't Turn Out the Lights. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back again next week with another scary story.